You're watching DD Indian News Hour. I'm Mark Lynn, and going back to our story on Syria and the unfolding developments there, to put this all into context, we have Ambassador Dilip Sinha, former senior diplomat. Thank you very much, Ambassador Sinha, for being with us. Now, how will the opposition factions maintain unity and try and govern effectively? That's, I suppose, the biggest question.
Well, that's, as you say, Mark, a billion-dollar question. Syria has been ruled by different factions. The ruling party of Bashar al-Assad controlled about 50-60% at the best of times for the last 13 years of Syria. A large part, the Kurdish part, has been, about 25% has been autonomous under the Syrian Democratic Forces. And the northern part was partly under the control of the HTS and then the Syrian National Army.
Right.
So it's been a fractured country, and there is no indication at the moment of how these factions will come together. Of course, the initial indications in terms of the statements that we are receiving from the new party that has come to power of al-Jilani, that he'll form an inclusive government, but that is easier said than done. These factions have been at war with each other over the last so many years. And the countries backing them are also at loggerheads with each other. So given the situation, it will not be easy for them to come together.
So talking about those countries that are backing them, now what role will these external powers like Russia, Iran, Turkey, the US play in this post-Assad era?
Well, Turkey and Qatar have been the backers of the HTS. They would be sitting pretty and happy right now that their faction has come to power in Damascus. Russia, of course, is a loser because Bashar al-Assad has taken asylum in Moscow. Russia's main concern right now would be the continuation of its bases in Syria, which are extremely important for it. That the only access it has to the Mediterranean is through a port in the port of Tartus in Syria. So Russia will be concerned about that. The US is actually in a dilemma, although they are celebrating the fact that an autocrat, as they say, has been overthrown and a democratic force has come into power. But the fact is that al-Jilani is actually still a listed and a marked terrorist by the US and the UN itself. So it is very odd that they are celebrating the coming into power of a person that they regard as a terrorist on whom there is a bounty on his head of $10 million in the US. So how the US reconciles itself to this, as well as the fact that the US has traditionally been a backer of the Kurdish forces in Syria.
Right.
And there have already been some clashes between the HTS and the Kurdish forces. How America balances this will be a challenge for the Americans. They'll have to do a lot of careful walking here, and also how they see Turkey's increasing role in this place. Hezbollah, of course, has been terribly weakened, as has been Iran by the defeat. But then there are still, while some refugees of Syria are going back to Syria with the fall of Assad, some others are actually leaving Syria. So there'll be a lot of turmoil can be expected in this region in the months to come.
So can the desire to rebuild infrastructure with the help from outside forces, which look like they want to help, be a sort of a uniting factor amongst these factional groups?
It seems very difficult at the moment because the first thing that the HTS force would do is to consolidate its position both in Damascus and towards the Israeli and the Jordanian borders, just towards the south. It is a faction that was at one time affiliated with the Islamic State. I'm so sure some of the ideological leanings would still be present there. So while they claim to be to form an inclusive government which will look after the welfare of the people of all the people of Syria, there will definitely be a lot of retaliation and reprisals against the supporters of the Bashar regime. And then the fact that Israel has already occupied the disengaged zone of the UN and also some other territory of Syria will bring this new regime into confrontation with Israel. And you must remember that the leader of this party, al-Jilani, has named himself as Nom de Guerre, is after the Golan region where he was born. So all this does not augur well in the immediate short term for peace in the region. But if they are able to do that and start the task of rebuilding Syria, which has been very badly hit by this long civil war, it would be a great benefit and boon to the people of Syria.
So the civil war is still on. In fact, according to reports that I've read, that there's still fighting going on in the Kurdish areas in the northeast. They're trying to. The fact is that the Kurdish forces itself. How are they going to navigate their relationship since Turkey is supporting the HTS currently and other regional players?
Yes, that will in fact be the biggest challenge, because on the one side, the US is supporting the Syrian Kurds, and for Turkey, crushing the Syrian Kurdish movement is extremely important, because the Turkish Kurds find shelter in the Syrian part. So it is important for them to get the HDS, the new regime in Syria, to take action against the Kurds in Syria, which would bring home to the US the contradiction between its support for the Syrian Kurds and for the HTS, especially because Turkey's position on this is extremely clear, that it wants the Kurdish forces in Syria to be crushed.
Ambassador Sinha, also, what measures do you think should be taken by the international community to address the humanitarian crisis? After all, the situation with refugees who had left over the last several years, people are now saying they should come back into Syria. And there are some who are still actually just hoping that they should get out right now. How should the world be looking at this problem?
Well, the humanitarian crisis in Syria is very serious. The country has, I believe, 90% of the population has fallen below the poverty line because of this long civil war. And almost 5.5 to 6 million people, Syrians, are living outside, nearly half of them in Turkey. Turkey, of course, would want them to go back to Syria so that the burden on Turkey is released. So that is the first challenge for the international community: create conditions within Syria for these refugees to go back. And the other is to ensure that do not have an outflux of refugees from Syria, the supporters of the Bashar regime and the members of the Alawite community to which Bashar belonged, because that would create another set of crises even before the present one has been resolved. So all that does present the international community with a huge challenge at a time when the war in both Lebanon, southern Lebanon, and Gaza continues.
Right.
Present a challenge to the UN forces, to the humanitarian agencies of the UN, to provide help to these refugees.
We leave it there. Thank you very much, Ambassador Dilip Sinha, former senior diplomat. Thank you for enlightening us on the bigger picture of how things are emerging in Syria.